Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. We're excited to announce that registration for our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA is officially open. Beginning March 25th, 2025, this 9-month facilitated learning journey was created for listeners like you, the entrepreneurs, artists, community leaders, and other folks on the front lines of the next economy. Based on our 15 years of experience working with over 300 different social enterprises, we'll explore the pitfalls of the business-as-usual economy and dive into key business principles from a regenerative and just perspective, all while fostering the community and connection we need to stay resilient, inspired, and motivated in our movement for global change. Interested in learning more? Join us for a free intro session where you can meet course facilitators and hear from our amazing alumni to determine if the course is a fit for you. Plus, you can save 20% on tuition when you register before February 3rd during our early bird sale. Get started at lifteconomy.com/MBA. Thanks for listening, and now onto the show.
Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy. My guest today is Jenny Morgan. Jenny is a passionate advocate for sustainable change, specializing in corporate social responsibility and social and environmental impact. As a public speaker and climate strategist, Jenny focuses on fostering collaboration within the climate movement. In her debut book, Cancel Culture in Climate, which is just published on Monday, January 13th, she explores how divisive discourse hinders meaningful climate action and offers strategies for moving toward unity and accountability. Drawing from her experiences, leading talks at events like S&P Global's Carbon Management Americas and the B Corp movement's Build Pacific Northwest Conference, Jenny provides a hopeful roadmap for navigating cancel culture to drive impactful environmental solutions. She lives in the Pacific Northwest with her family. And Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So maybe let's start with a bit about your background. So before you got into this book and the whole cancel culture idea, what were you up to sort of earlier in your career? How did you come to this place?
Yeah, it all started when I was working for a large tech organization, and I was leading a team of event managers and project managers that were basically attempting to bring more of an accessible, inclusive, and sustainable experience to the developer community. And this was worldwide. And so we were constantly trying to figure out different ways to navigate various cultures and ways of living life in the tech world. And I started to realize that in that effort, there was a lot of fear about doing things incorrectly. And in that place of fear, we would opt to not do anything at all. And I started to become a bit frustrated about that because I think trial and error and iterating and evolving is part of the human experience as well as industry and businesses experience. And so I started to kind of see this fear-driven leadership. As I began to dive deeper into the climate space, I saw it even more. And a lot of shame and blame being placed on others for not being right, not being good enough, not being loud enough, not being correct in how they communicate. Just a lot of pitfalls that businesses in particular and individuals can fall in. And so it makes it a very scary place where we actually need everyone involved and doing things imperfectly if we want to be successful. So I then deemed this kind of cancel culture in the climate space.
Got it. And so how are you defining cancel culture, just so we can sort of get folks on the baseline of how we're going about that?
Yeah, it's when we're prioritizing shame and blame over action. And so if you looked at a timeline of your entire day, you're spending more time trying to figure out who has done something incorrectly or not met standards versus actually promoting success and progress. And so cancel culture is this type of environment that we're creating where we're spending more time finding gotcha moments versus finding areas where we can continue to improve, work together, collaborate, and celebrate success.
Yep. And it seems like, I mean, cancel culture in a way has been around since humans have probably been around, but it really got amplified in like 2010 or so with social media. Is that kind of your understanding as well?
Yeah. Well, cancel culture is in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely something that you can also find it in the animal kingdom too, where when resources are scarce in particular, or if there's a overwhelming sense of urgency, like when we have an impending or current climate crisis going on, we tend to shun others and start to divide groups based on ideologies or ways of thinking or ways of behaving. And so it's definitely been around in the animal kingdom and the human kingdom since the beginning of time. But yeah, I think with media, it's so quick to share thoughts and opinions and headlines that it's continued this type of shame and blame much quicker than it would if we were still reliant on a daily newspaper hitting our stoop or something.
Yeah. And it seems like, I was trying to think about this before interview, like there's probably some genuine emotion or feeling, or there's something that's like genuine behind the canceling. And like, so what is actually trying to be done, or like, what are people feeling when they feel like they want to cancel someone? Like, what's the more genuine emotion that we're actually working with?
I think there's a lot of anger and frustration. Yeah. And even if we've all contributed to where we are today in some form, we've all been part of the problem. I would be bold enough to say that everyone somewhat assumes that it's not their fault, even if they are an executive of a highly polluting organization or leading of an industry. Not everyone feels as if they're the ones that made this happen. And so we need to then point a finger, and human beings are very prone to dichotomous thinking. So this kind of either or, black and white, all or nothing type of thinking, as well as wanting to label and come to a quick conclusion on whose fault it is. And so when we kind of don't have a clear answer, there's a lot of anger and frustration. And so that rage comes out in a form of cancel culture. And in the book, I talk a bit about climate activists that are displaying these very passionate forms of frustration by, throwing paint or powder on different monuments and things and getting that type of publicity in the media. And even though I resonate strongly with that type of frustration and anger, because I feel like there's so much that we can be doing together and it isn't being done. A lot is being done too, but I do empathize with that type of emotional expression. But at the same time, I ask, who is your audience? If you're throwing paint on the Mona Lisa, for example, who is going to change their behavior based on that display of emotion? And I would press that it's only going to be the people standing next to you with buckets of paint. Otherwise, everyone is actually going to retract from that type of display. And so that's where I want to press pause on transitioning the way that we express our frustration and our demands and our accountability in a way that actually moves the needle forward versus actually accidentally pushing people away from the move. It seems too extreme to get involved in because it's so divisive and polarizing, when actuality, it should be very inclusive and inviting.
Yeah. And it feels like even beneath the anger, I'm like getting to the psychology a little bit. It's like the fear and sadness is what like we really don't want to feel. Right. And so the fear and sadness like shows up as anger, which then can like lead to a cancel culture component. But it's more like this. Yeah, like I think a lot of us who feel on a deep level like connected to nature and connected to the earth, there's like this deep sadness that like comes out as anger because we don't know what to do with that. It seems like, I don't know.
And to play devil's advocate a bit, if you take whom I've met and spoken with, if you take a executive of an oil and gas company, for example, they too feel a sense of anger that they've been deemed a Disney villain that wakes up every morning plotting how they are going to ruin the planet. And they themselves don't feel that way. And they're stuck in this grappling of, everyone's telling me I'm bad, but I'm just a human that's putting food on the table, that had a family history in oil and gas. And I grew up in this region, and that's where everyone went to work. And so if we continue to label those individuals to be evil, they will continue to shy away from confronting change in a way that's healthy. And so I see it on all sides, that there's anger, frustration, inability to do anything and take accountability in some way because there's not really a path forward. There's no support there.
Yeah. Maybe it'd be helpful if you would describe like when you're feeling like you want to cancel someone. I think you have like these 5 steps or something, right?
Yeah.
Because I think part of canceling too, which is so appealing because it feels good to be angry. It's like for me, just real quickly, it was around like racial justice and being like really mad at other white people, being like, you idiots, like, what are you doing? You're not doing this, you're not doing that. And just there's a part that gets really, it's like a very fulfilling feeling to do that. Cause it's like, it's not me, it's you, and sort of pointing fingers. But I also knew on a deeper level and, over time that I wasn't actually changing anyone's mind, it just felt good in the moment, but it was more about my own ego than sort of changing people, I think.
Yeah, I've noticed in myself sometimes when I'm speaking with someone and I'm just going to speak casually to resonate with people that might be struggling with this. I know I'm right, and I'm going to be on the right side of history here. And so I'm going to say these facts, statistics, implications to action, whatever it might be that you have in your back pocket ready to just slam down in the middle of a debate. What I stress is that, you're not going to get the outcome or the result that you want. You might drive away with that sense of adrenaline and, knowing that you're on the right side of history or whatever it might be, but nothing's changed. You haven't changed the fabric of reality at all. You've just kind of inflated your own ego for a minute, but then we wake up in the same situation the following day.
Yeah. So what are those steps that folks can think about?
Yeah. So the first thing that I like to stress to people is that, are you open to questioning your own beliefs, or are you operating from a position of certainty? So is the only option that you're 100% correct? And if that's the case, then you're not open to a dialogue at all. And so you might as well just go into the restroom and talk to yourself in the mirror, because if you're coming from that place of certainty, then there's no real reason to have a conversation because you're not willing to have one. So if you can ask yourself that, then you can go to, can I represent the other person's perspective clearly, or am I going to kind of mock them or ridicule them in a way? So am I already making assumptions about, not only is their opinion wrong, but they themselves are deep down wrong, that they're not even able and capable to articulate themselves. So if you can start to kind of explore their own motivations, you can start to get some insight on where there might be common ground. Another aspect is, are you attacking an idea, or are you attacking an entity or an individual? And this comes a lot when you're engaging with media. When you see a headline and it says XYZ brand falsified their climate impact by buying crappy credits, and then you're like, and you're like, not another one, and you've got this spike of adrenaline coming, but we don't click the article or really dive deeper into what happened there. We've just deemed this company to be evil, and knowing that they were going through this kind of false process. So stop yourself there, and rather attacking that entity, attack the idea. I don't like it if someone's lying about their philanthropic actions or their actual footprint. I don't like that. And stop there. Because if we're not willing to do the due diligence to explore the why and the how and what's actually happening, then we shouldn't then be able to make assumptions or start to make opinions about that entity. So that's a big one, because with media and headlines, it's impossible for us to do research on every single thing. And so you're more than welcome to formulate opinions, but just ensure that it's about the actual idea and value versus an entity or a person. If you've hit your boundary, respect that boundary. That's definitely something that you should know about yourself. And your boundary is fluid. On a Tuesday, you might be able to sit down for multiple hours with someone that you feel opposes your values and you really want to dive deeper. And then you might not be capable of doing that day. And that's perfectly fine. But being able to, really understand yourself and what you're capable of at that moment is really important. And then lastly, are you able to articulate what could change your mind? So what could they say or do that could actually change your mind to be more on that common ground? And that one's really important because that's going to be able to give you the tools to articulate what those expectations are. Because we often say, I'll never do this. I don't engage with these people. I don't buy from this company. But we don't ever go into more details on what could they do differently that would actually change that behavior. So those are the 5 questions that I stress if you're feeling as if you do cancel or you're in the middle of canceling someone or something.
I love that. And there's a part of me that is saying, but all those questions are about me. It's not about the other person. And maybe you want to speak about that sort of like dichotomy.
Yeah. Well, I'm speaking to you as the individual that might be struggling with canceling. And so if you are an organization or if you are trying to advise an organization or an individual on ways to evolve, then there's definitely ways that you can stress engaging a third party to do an audit, being more transparent, encouraging that dialogue and finding out what their motivations are. So let's say you are engaging with someone and having a conversation and you want to accurately represent their perspective. Asking questions, being curious, and allowing them that time and that room to speak, that's going to be key for you to be able to then have an open dialogue. And so that makes it two-sided. These questions are a way to kind of break down any walls that are preventing you from having a conversation and giving that individual or corporation space to articulate what their obstacles are. Because it's my opinion that everyone would behave as positively as possible if there weren't other priorities that were weighing them down. If everyone could still do the exact same thing every day, make the exact same amount of money, grow in their job, not make any significant changes that change the way that they behave or they work or any of those things, and also put a positive impact on the planet and the people. It's of my belief, and everyone that I've never met a purely evil person, that they would do those things. It's all the other things in their mind and all those other priorities that are really distracting and they find to be obstacles. And so if we can, open up space to really talk about that, we can start to collaborate more.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, I love this because in a way, it puts the onus on the person wanting to do the canceling, like their question of just like, am I right? Like coming into the conversation. Because I think, and I kind of butt heads with my family a little bit, speaking of, we talked about politics briefly, my family and I am very like liberal and left. And I also get frustrated when my family will just sort of like recite the talking points of like, oh, all the conservatives are this way. Everyone thinks this. This is exactly how they always do things. I'm like, but it just feels like we're doing the same thing. Like we're coming from we're clearly right. When will they change position, which is really dangerous. It seems like it's not helping. It's not actually changing minds.
Yeah. And it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can see that we really, and I'm saying we, by those that might have aligned more on the left politically, the mark was missed in the way that we needed to communicate. And I mean, that's been dissected to ad nauseum about, some of the focuses that needed to be stressed a bit more. And I think that the reason why is because we weren't really curious. We never really took the time to understand what everyone's primary concerns were so that there was a unanimous agreement on where we should be prioritizing our time and our efforts.
Yeah. And so with climate, I think you used the example of Nestle in one of your talks, or like Kit Kat, and maybe using another example, Nespresso. So you're involved like with the B Corp movement. Nespresso was certified in 2022, a big uproar, and a lot of B Corps were saying like, how could we let this happen? Or I know that Nespresso has been quite canceled in a way, vilified by a lot of folks, at least in the B Corp world. And is there anything like, what would you say to, B Corps or other people in sort of like next economy space who are thinking like, how do we think about a corporation like Nespresso and, because it feels like if we allow some empathy, or like if we allow some belonging or sense of like connection with the people there, it's sort of like it's like a betrayal of like what we stand for or something. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do think that everyone deserves a retrial. And so that's where I think that there are some flaws in the cancel culture movement, is that there's no date to reassess the label that we've placed upon someone or an organization. I mean, being really clear about what standards need to be upheld rather than yes or no. I think the why and the reasoning is what is typically lacking. Group of people or organizations because you haven't met XYZ. But then it typically doesn't go past that. So what would be helpful is that you can share, I too struggled with this piece of information. And this is what organizations that have been accepted with open arms into the B Corp movement have done to actually make that change possible. And so I would continue to provide feedback that they can decide if they want to take that feedback and apply it, but give the tools and the feedback rather than you're not accepted because you've partnered with oil and gas in the past or something of that sort. It's, what can they actually do and what are the steps to take to actually make change to then be in a more welcoming environment. And then once they've achieved that certification, embrace them as being someone that has done the work to get there. It's not easy to get the B Corp certification and to maintain it. And so that should be celebrated. And there's going to be a Beehive member and a B leader that is a human being that will be representing their company, and they should be welcomed with open arms, and we should continue to work with them. I mean, I look at all of these positive cases within the B Corp movement where they really view the growth of their organization as a journey. And I bring up Patagonia a lot, which is, obviously an easier one to bring up, but it's a journey to them. They're constantly working on ways to evolve. And we could all just call it done with Patagonia. They've really done the work, and we could say, you've done it. You can graduate and you're here forever. But I do think that if we continue that type of mentality where we're all flawed, we're all trying to work on things. There's some parts of us that are good and some parts that need work. And that's something that we can work on together and support each other. And that should be in business too.
Yeah, even Patagonia, I remember this is maybe 2017 or 18. The people for the ethical treatment of animals, PETA, like was in Argentina and like filmed some of the wool mills in Argentina that were like, shearing the sheep that Patagonia used in like an aggressive way, and like put out these like this whole like website, and was like basically like trying to cancel Patagonia in a way. So even Patagonia, that sort of has a lot of goodwill built up, can be subject to it. And I'm not sure, I don't know how effective, that would be an interesting question of like, how effective would it be if PETA had said privately to Patagonia, like, hey, we found all this stuff. Maybe it's more like a calling in versus calling out. Maybe, I don't know if you want to speak to that in terms of like effectiveness.
Yeah, well, I definitely think it should be a conversation and highlighting a problem and offering solutions to fix that. I would also say that that type of campaign, why would then H&M see this article and say, well, if Patagonia can get dragged through the mud about the way that sheep are being treated, then there's no reason for me to even try. And so that's what I see as being most dangerous. You can criticize a Patagonia about some sort of practice. I would argue that Patagonia will probably be fine throughout it just because of everything else that they've built. But yes, I mean, it could have them lose customers in that process. What I find to be most dangerous is all the other fashion outlets that are watching this happen, and then they're just completely giving up and recanting on their commitments or going silent, not being outward about their successes or their challenges. That's where I see the most amount of danger, is us watching on the sidelines while we, eat popcorn and hear all of these salacious headlines come out.
Yeah. That's why TMZ and People magazine are so popular, right? It's like people love that kind of stuff, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think if we're more conscious of that about ourselves, we can start to kind of curb that behavior. And if we start to engage with more positive news or be more curious or, really diving deeper into one or two topics that you might hear that are proposed as negative, but then you kind of dig a bit deeper into the why and the how and understanding it, it starts to lower the amount of dopamine that you get from that kind of negative news. And so you can kind of rewire your brain on how it responds to negative and positive, media or just conversations in general.
Are there other key aspects of the book that are really important for folks to know about, like that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I go through ways to do a motivational conversation. So you mentioned the questions being very one-sided, and we hear about motivational interviewing a lot, but I kind of tweaked it and changed it to motivational conversation, because then that makes it a two-sided dialogue versus just, I'm going to trick them into an interview style that will get them to adopt my thought process. So making it more motivational conversation, there's steps that you can take to really start to break down those barriers and come to common ground. I also have a chapter dedicated solely to companies that are operating in fear, and they are constantly feeling as if they're going to be accused of greenwashing or canceled and because of some flaw. And so what are some steps that you can take to be more transparent, be more clear about what you've met and what you still need to do, having third-party assessments done. And then also for those that there's an entire chapter dedicated to companies that have been canceled and how you can reemerge and enter back into the space. So starting with your internal stakeholders and having that dialogue there and starting to grow that level of feedback that you're getting. And then going through some various steps on how you can better communicate your goals, because a lot of times these are breaks in communication versus complete lies. I mean, there are some that have lied. I talk about Volkswagen and how they completely lied about their emissions and actually had mechanisms in place that would falsify data. So, I mean, that's an all-out lie. But then sometimes it's really just a lotion that is trying to say we're 30% more recyclable, and then they get completely trashed because they still have some sort of toxic material or chemical still in their product while they're trying to celebrate something else. So it seems like you're trying to gaslight the customer. And to me, that's a communication problem. There's ways to better communicate. We've made our product X amount more recyclable, and next we're looking to remove X amount of toxic chemicals from our product. Here's why we use it, and here's what we're hoping to change and make it an alternative ingredient list or something of that sort. So being really clear about the why and the what is really important to stress.
There's this element of cancel culture being problematic and affecting companies. And I think you would probably say there's nothing in this book that's saying like cancel culture is causing, like, it's not causing a part of the crisis. It's like there's all these structural elements of like, we need, maybe to more incentivize renewable energy and other components. We need to have like, more awareness of environmental impact in addition to not canceling companies, right? So it's like part of a suite of solutions rather than being like, this is the one thing, right? Just want to make sure that's.
Yeah, I feel as if we do have the solutions to solve climate change and to navigate our way out of the crisis. It won't happen tomorrow. Unfortunately, we're in the generation where we can decide what the future looks like, and we're going to have to experience it in real time. But if we are unable to communicate with one another, there are symptoms that come out of this kind of cancel culture type of environment, like greenwashing, green hushing, green recanting, people taking away their commitments just because what's the point? There's no ROI. So by making the communication more about accountability versus cancel culture, we will start to see organizations be more transparent, be more honest, celebrate successes loudly. I work with a lot of customers that will not talk about amazing things that they're doing just because of the potential that there could be some sort of public scrutiny.
That's like the green hushing.
Yeah. And that's terrifying to me because that's limiting the amount of people thinking that all of these good things are happening, which does not encourage more people to participate. But if we heard about more and more organizations and people participating positively in a flawed way, because we're all flawed to some degree, then that will encourage everyone to participate and move the needle further and further. If there's no hope, then why even be a part of the movement? And that's what I'm hoping to change with the book.
Is there a line of, like, I'm thinking sometimes these arguments get fleshed out in like the edge case scenario or like the most extreme scenario, right? So you look at like lists of the top 100 corporations that contributed to climate change, it's like Gazprom in Russia or like Saudi Aramco or Exxon or Chevron. And do you say, is there a part of you that's like, if you are like the CEO of Exxon and you really like don't care at all about the environment, you're just all profit driven, is there a part of you that feels like, well, maybe cancel culture, or like, is there a way that canceling or like a calling out approach could be more effective than maybe back channeling or calling in that maybe they won't listen to? Or where do you draw the line on like sort of, is canceling ever needed or a good thing?
I think canceling is when the door closes permanently, whereas accountability, there's a crack. And so you can still come through the door. And you said the CEO of ExxonMobil, it's somewhat timely because they just talked about how the IRA should not be taken down. And that's something that the new administration should not remove. So that to me is very curious, coming from someone that we would typically deem to say that any form of regulation is something that should be taken away immediately. And so that to me is an entry point to a dialogue. And so you can say, these are my boundaries and this is what I expect. And I invite you to the conversation. And so as long as it's always inviting and that there's a list of things that you're expecting, then I do think that that is still a way to express your demands, but the door remains open rather than cancel culture being, you're never going to be.
You're forever. Yeah. You're forever
Right.
on the blacklist. Like we'll never talk to you again.
Exactly. Because then once you're on the blacklist and you can't ever leave, then why stop behaving that got you there in the first place? Like, why change behavior? You're already there permanently anyway. Might as well enjoy the benefits of being there, and that's where I really want to stress that that's dangerous.
Yeah. There was this podcast I listened to a while ago in relation to racial justice. It was like how to win an argument. But this guy, it was a black guy who had convinced like 200 KKK members to like leave the KKK. And the way he did it was by becoming friends with them, like just like, hey, what do you like having a beer? And like, it was sort of the normalization and relational component that they were like, oh yeah, like it is weird to have these views when I have a clear person in front of me that's a counter to these like belief system. And so, yeah, he had defrocked or whatever the name is when a KKK member leaves, he had done more than like a lot of like large organizations that were like more aggressively trying to target the KKK. And so I think part of the idea of actually getting people to change is partly like what you were saying, is like, what is your goal? Like, who's your audience? And I don't know if people maybe in the throes of cancel culture are even being that strategic. It's more like reaction to like something shiny, like this is terrible. And, part of that fear and sadness we spoke about. But there's like a level of, it's like the relational community component of changing people, like the calling in, which is, it's actually like more work, but also more effective, right? Because it's easy to send off a tweet. But if you're like, hey, I'm going to like befriend this ExxonMobil CEO and like, what do they think? What keeps them up at night and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And we feel as if we can make some sweeping statement, like everyone that voted for Trump is this, or something like that, or everyone that works at Shein is this. And so we start to kind of make these blanket statements. We forget that these are groups of people that have various ways of getting to their work or getting to how they voted. And it's the one-on-one conversations that actually create change. And so that's why I focus so much on in the book about those one-on-one conversations, because is a sustainability lead in ExxonMobil that loves hummus and watches Friends and goes home and has 2 kids and they love football. And there's a human side of what we typically remove the humanity from these conversations. And so if we can put humanity back and be really honest and realistic about how everyone is living in the gray, then we can actually move towards a more progressive and more collaborative type of world. And so remove the labels, stop making these assumptions. If you've built a story about someone, but you've never met them, you've never actually verified that story with them before, then you're living in an alternative reality inside your own head. I mean, we've all had lengthy conversations with people that are just actually in your own mind. You're like, oh, I just wish I would have said this. And then they would have said that. And then I would have come back with this. But that actually didn't happen. And so we have to remember that. Like, we need to give them a chance to have that dialogue that is based in reality and is very human.
Yeah, it reminds me of, do you know Byron Katie?
No.
She's a author and more like spiritual guide who came up with this process called The Work. And I was sort of into it in maybe 2023, and she's been around a long time. So Byron Katie has these 4 questions. The first one is it true? The second one is, can you absolutely know that it's true? The third one is, how do you react? And what happens when you believe that thought, like when you believe it's true? And then who would you be without that thought? And so she has you question a lot of things. Like, you might have this statement of, ExxonMobil is destroying the environment. So like, you could take it through the 4 questions. Like, 1, is it true? You might be like, yeah, it is true. And then number 2, can you absolutely know it's true? You're like, I think they are. I haven't like personally verified that they are, or something like that. But maybe you say, yes, like I still believe that. What happens when you believe that thought is like, well, I get contracted. I feel angry. I feel like I want to yell at somebody. I'm like meaner to my kids, or, and then like, who would you be without that thought? It's like, well, I guess I'd probably be more open to considering if people aren't doing these things, so it's like a whole process of breaking down these like rigid belief systems. And it's actually kind of similar in some ways to like your thing about coming in as right, from the beginning. So I'm not sure if that brings up anything for you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was speaking with someone about how this book was coming out, and they play golf a lot. And I said, you should share it with your golf buddies because it might be an interesting read. And they kind of quipped back like, well, I don't think we really believe in all of that. And rather than, going through these steps quite quickly that you're commenting about from this other individual's book, and then also just kind of going through these steps, rather than me now reacting about how carbon behaves in the atmosphere and that we've known this for a really long time and you can see it and feel it and experience it.
Or don't you know that golf uses so much water, or like shaming them, right?
Yeah.
For even playing golf, right?
Yeah. Or, hey, did you know that there's, on average 15 orphaned wells by every single golf club, leaking methane in real time? And so, I mean, you could go through all of those steps, but I just stopped and I said, well, it's really just a book about pollution and the accumulation of pollution and how we can potentially curb that. Do you have any experience with pollution? And they did. They live in Florida. There's a lot of pollution happening on the beaches, and with the storms happening, there's tons of trash in the street. And that then got them engaged in a conversation with me. So rather than me, putting my scientific hat on and explaining what global warming is and how that's been proven, I just talked about something that we both find relatable about how we don't want an accumulation of trash in our ocean that you live right next to, or being unable to play golf because the air quality in the region is so poor at the time and it completely ruins your vacation. Just finding what those motivations are so that you're on the same team. Now it's not a debate, we're commiserating together about something that we both agree with now. So I found that to be a bit inspiring. But I mean, it is also really exhausting. So you do need to know when you're capable of doing that. I wouldn't do that every day. I mean, even talking about this book, there's been some times where it's been really exhausting, or people misunderstand what I'm saying about cancel culture, that I don't want to stress change, that I'm just cool with whatever. That is definitely not what I'm promoting. I just think that we can communicate a bit better to then put our values forward in a way that doesn't isolate. And so, yeah, it's a process, but I think if we work on it and we're really intentional about applying frameworks and tactics to the way we communicate, it will start to feel more natural and not feel so overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think your comment about, relating to those guys playing golf, I remember I did an interview with this guy, George Gale, who's like a old school organizer, and that's sort of organizing 101 is like, if you're speaking with a mom in Iowa, she might not, is raising single mom in Iowa, raising two kids. Like, she might not care about climate, first of all, but she might care about clean water for her kids. Right. So it's like finding the issue that resonates and then like meeting them where they're at. And then it's sort of like building on that, as opposed to like, yeah, let me tell you what the IPCC says about
Yeah.
like, what it looks like in 2030.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's see. In terms of next steps, so the book, this will, just for folks listening, we're recording this before the book's come out, but when this is launched, the book will be out. So yeah, what are your hopes and dreams for the book? Like, who do you hope reads it, and what's sort of the impact you hope to make?
In writing a book, which I think you are very knowledgeable about being able to comment on this too, you need to be really specific on who the audience is. And I started to notice that I have a very specific person that I think should be reading this book, which is a sustainability leader that is feeling overwhelmed and they don't really know what to do next. That's who I want to encourage to operate with a bit more confidence in the way that they're navigating their sustainability strategy and taking feedback in stride, being comfortable with being a bit uncomfortable, exploring internally of, maybe there's breaks in communication between their organization and marketing, and kind of understanding that a bit more. That's the person that I know should be reading this. But then at the end, I always say, but anyone else that just cares about the climate. I do think that it is written in a way that it is accessible to anyone that is finding conversations hard. So I hope that the book will create change in an individual's life, and also in the way that companies are behaving and how they're contributing to climate. And so that's my ultimate goal. I also have just like some silly goals where I walk on a plane and someone's reading it in first class, and I go back.
First class. I love it.
Yeah. 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 And I'm like, hey, to be like, let's crack that book open. But yeah, so I hope to just see people changing the way that they speak with one another and entering into 2025 with a bit more confidence and being bold and transparent about how they're going to behave for the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I mean, I can just say it's sort of, I think it allows conversations, like just having the book, around is like, oh, there is, like, we should be talking about this, right? It's sort of, in my mind, it's like gives you cover to then have conversations about like, are we being too dismissive, and sort of allows conversations that maybe would still feel too dangerous to have. So I think that's also a win that I see people maybe benefiting from.
Yeah, and maybe media outlets will start to see different clicks based on what resonates with the audience and being a bit more transparent in the headline of what that article is actually about and encouraging more curiosity rather than these kind of one-liner points. And so there's a ripple effect that is possible. We just need to keep dropping the stones. And so I think this book is like a large boulder of a stone in the ripple of climate action.
So maybe could you just give folks like full name of the book, release date, like where folks can buy it, all that good stuff, maybe like any LinkedIn or like, whatever that sort of socials that you want to drop for folks.
Yeah. So the book is called Cancel Culture and Climate. And you can go to the website, which is cancelcultureandclimate.com. It's available in paperback and ebook on Amazon on January 13th. And on the website, if you go there, not only will you be able to order the book, but you can also look at some different workshops and conversations that I can help facilitate or we can talk about. I talk about not only navigating cancel culture and climate, but also climate anxiety, ways to be a bit more of a bold, confident leader in the climate space. So that's an option. And I hope people really enjoy it. I'm talking about it a lot on LinkedIn too. So you can find me, Jenny Morgan, on LinkedIn. That's the only social that I am part of right now.
That's great.
But yeah, I would love to see people talking about it, maybe bringing up things that really resonated with them or things that they want to dive in deeper and expand upon some of the concepts. That's a dream. So I hope people find it encouraging, but then also set them on a path of their own that, helps promote this type of communication style.
Awesome. So in addition to buying the book and checking it out, anything else you need? We like to ask, like, what do you need right now for our guests so the audience can help support their work?
I would love to collaborate with those that are in organizations where they feel as if this is a problem. That is something that I think we could see some significant change if we just brought people to the table internally, because I think a lot of that starts inside the organization or inside the association. So that would be something I'd want to promote. And also just giving it to some individuals that you think might be curious about climate impacts, but they're not really sure how they impact them. This might make them feel a bit more seen. And so sharing it outside of your network in a way that engages more people, it might kick off some very interesting conversations too. So bring the tools yourself or loop me in or, engage with others on ways that you can reduce the amount of shame and blame being put forth and actually talk about more progressive actions.
I love it. Well, Jenny, this has been a pleasure. Maybe we'll have you back later this year to see how it's been going. How are folks responding? And you probably have more stories to share. So I just really appreciate you and the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here. Thank you so much.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.